Hello. Today we're going to talk about the devil. The imagery that I have right here is from a tarot deck. It is the Rider-Waite tarot deck. In order to give a personification, I want to say, of the devil, I chose this card as the symbol and the imagery of what he looks like because it's the one I'm most familiar with. And this is the one that I know the most about. I think the first thing I want to do is look up a few excerpts from this book. It's called The Science of Mind by Ernest Holmes. Right here is fine. Let's see. Let's see. Actually, let's just go to page 53. There we go. Nope, that's 153. Here we go. So it's on this section that says what individuality really means. So let's start up here actually. It says individuality means self-choice, volition, conscious mind, personified spirit, complete freedom, and a power to back up that freedom. And then we come down here. The answer to the question, why did not God make us free and compel that freedom, is apparent when we realize that even God could not do this. A freedom under compulsion would produce a freedom that would ultimately amount to the very worst kind of bondage. There is no such thing as compulsory freedom. Even God himself could not ordain this, for he could not do anything that would violate his own nature. No, man must be created with the possibility of limitless freedom and then be let alone to discover the fact for himself. On the road to that discovery, he must be subject to the law of life. And if in ignorance he violates that law, he must thereby suffer. This is not, however, because God imposes the suffering or desires it, but simply because it is the necessity of the cause. And this is the last part that I'm going to read. It says the meaning of freedom. Freedom of will means the ability to do, say, and think as one wishes. To express life as one personally desires. To be able only to think and dream of freedom would not be liberty. To imagine without the power to manifest that imagination would be to remain in a sort of dream world which would never come to complete self-realization. This is not the world in which man lives at all, for man's world is one of self-expression, even though that expression appears at times to destroy him. Okay, and that's where we're going to begin today. So, here I sort of am not really going to talk about the system of oppression itself, because I already have a video on that. It's called The Anatomy of Oppression, and on my channel it's a playlist called Inside the Simulation. So this video isn't really going to be about oppression in a sense of the system which governs society. Okay, just want to make that clear. There are infinite forms of oppression, but I do believe that there is sort of really only one artist. This video is more so going to be about the personality of the artist. The discussion, it may be a bit unconventional because I feel as though I have a unique perspective on the mind that is materializing and observing this concept of oppression into existence. And so again, I feel like this image right here is ultimately the personification of that mind. the artist of oppression. I feel, okay, let's say, hypothetically speaking, right? There is a God. So there is this concept of a being, right, that has a being that has omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence, right? And let's see what these definitions are. The three omni attributes of God characterize him as all-powerful, all-knowing, and everywhere present. Omnipotence means that God is in total control of himself and his creation. Omniscience means that he is the ultimate criterion of truth and falsity, so that his ideas are always true. Omniscience means that since God's power and knowledge extend to all parts of his creation, he himself is present everywhere. The prefix omni means all. Okay, cool. So, right, we have this concept of God, right? Hypothetically speaking. And he is all-knowing, all-powerful, and everywhere present. And so within that, we have this relationship between a creator and a creation. And the creation, right, as we sort of started with the Ernest Holmes reference, is born with free will and left alone to discover it for himself. But I believe that somewhere along the way, right, of man being left alone with his own free will, he discovers oppression. So now there is this sort of duality going on in his life, where there is this sort of concept of him in all of creation being born free. And then there is also simultaneously the reality where all of creation is born into enslavement through this sort of systematic oppression. But I think that if I could redefine the artist of oppression, I feel as though the name of that artist would be God, because we have this sort of all-knowing, all-powerful, everywhere present being, right? And within this sort of infinite mind, right, of God, he would not be experiencing free will, because there would be no thing that he can choose to experience and no thing that he cannot choose to experience. So I think when it comes down to the relationship between God as a creator and the creations of God of which he governs, I believe that free will is sort of seen as the opposite experience of true love. And I think the reflection of that relationship looks like this, right? The reflection ultimately is, I think, intended to reveal the true nature of reality. And I feel like the brain of the human being enslaved by his own lack of self-knowledge is, I would like to say, contrary to the ordinary course of nature. And so let's go back a moment, right? We say free will, stability to think, say, do as one wishes. And I said I believe that this would be the opposite of true love. So what is true love? I think true love is a self-imposed restriction, a restriction imposed on the self. And there's this word that's coming up, and I kind of just want to see what it means. Order or decree officially. Prescribe, determine something. Order. So ordain. To establish or order by appointment, decree, or law. So, in many ways, I feel as though true love is a self-imposed restriction, and that free will would be the opposite of true love. I believe that true love would be a self-imposed restriction because when we talk about this hypothetical concept of God, right? A being that is only capable of being everywhere, knowing everything, and having every form of power. That is a self-imposed restriction, because at that point, all of which is created within any point in time or space, he would be that thing. Every creation which is made, he would know exactly how it feels to think, speak, act, and be as that creation. And there would be not one creation that he cannot understand or experience himself become. That is not free will. There is nothing that he can choose at that point. Once he chose to create life, he gave away his own ability to be free and to choose willingly, period. Let's do this really quick. I kind of want to give a bit of like a opposite, so that okay, so we're gonna compare and contrast these two images, right? Let's say on the material, right, in the visible plane, this is what God looks like, right? And then as above, so below. And this is what the devil looks like, right? Personally, when I put these two images side by side, I see the exact same thing. In that I believe it is intended that instead of man believing that he is immediately born into enslavement and that he has to strive for free will, or vice versa, that he is born with free will, right? I think that there comes a point in every person's life where they have the ability to choose to experience true love or to have free will. And I don't think you can have both. I don't. I think the artist of oppression is the truest lover, because that oppression is a self-imposed restriction that prevents him from having the ability to choose what part of the universe, what part of creation, what part of humanity, what part of himself he loves and what part he doesn't, what part he experiences oneness and unity with and what part he doesn't, what part he chooses to know and what part he wants to ignore. And I think any creation that willingly enters under this sort of self-imposed internal system of oppression, right? Instead of the external plane, it's internal, it's self-imposed, okay? And it is seen as a disciplinary action. I think this is the image of God. This is what it looks like. That self-imposed restriction, that self-imposed oppression. Let's go ahead and look up oppression, right? Prolonged, cruel, or unjust treatment or control. Let's see this word. I like this one the most. It's a little bit less biased because, again, we're not really talking about society and the oppression that exists in society. We're talking about oppression as an infinite sort of concept, and within that sort of infinite nature and infinite possibility, there is a version of oppression that is self-imposed and works for the highest good of that which is subject to it. So I was saying that I sort of like this one the best. This one. People who are prevented from having the same opportunities, freedom, and benefit as others. So let's say this is the image of true love, right? Let's say that. And I compared it to this image at first, right? And so there's like as above, so below type of thing here. This would be the expression of free will, and this would be the expression of true love and what it looks like as a reflection of each other. So when we talk about this self-imposed restriction, right, of oppression, you can look and see here, right, that they have these sort of like chains around their neck down here, right? So they have these chains around their neck, right? But these chains are intended to look loose. They're not necessarily in a chokehold, right? So that they aren't able to get out, right? No, that's why it's self-imposed, right? They're choosing to be here. They're choosing to share this sort of experience of oppression together, right? So we have this sort of here is the personification of the divine feminine, and this down here, this little thing right here, you know, I feel as though is intended to symbolize like nature, as a law, right, that man, right, human, anyone with a mind can impress their thoughts into nature's laws and experience themselves, be a conscious creator in the universe, right? And this is the divine feminine because in reality she is the, like I said, sort of the personification of the subconscious mind. And the subconscious mind is, in its most simple terms, I feel as though the part of the being, of any being, that is penetrated by thoughts in order to produce a fully realized concept, idea, or dream. And this being over here, right, is intended to personify the divine masculine. But I think what's important is to realize over here she sort of has this symbol of fertility, let's say that. And over here there's fire. And I believe this is to personify creativity, sexual energy, the divine masculine, spirit, that which is infinite in nature. And I think it sort of represents the ability to create or destroy, to have really no form or structure, yet still have the ability to, more like the potential, to manifest form or structure, right? That's this right here. But you can see they're both kind of inducing this sort of oppressive like state here, and a chain to this black box, right? And I think that this black box is sort of I want to say a singular conscious mind. Like, I feel like it's intended to resemble the fact that they are both chaining their selves and restricting their selves to the use of a singular conscious mind, that neither one of them sort of share their own expression of willpower, of will. And we can sort of see governing the entire thing is this entity, right? That is expressed as the devil. But this entity is not human in nature. And I believe that inside the experience of true love, I believe both of these entities, right, both the masculine and the feminine, are subject to the will of God. But this would create him naturally into an oppressive force. He would become the sort of master and both lovers, right, that are part of this experience of true love would be enslaved mentally and also physically, as we can see, since their sort of minds are kind of chained together, their bodies are stuck in a singular position. They're technically unable to move, right? But I think what's important to point out here is that he is not keeping them there, right? They are willingly choosing to be free of the ability to choose, act, think, speak, or be on their own. And because of that, the experience of reality that they have is controlled, right? And they are each, let's go back, prevented from having the same opportunities, freedom, and benefits as others. Why? Well, once you give up your ability to think, act, speak, choose as you wish, you enter into that same sort of mental state of being infinite, because at that point you would be applying no force, push, or pull, and the mind that you will be using, the experience of reality you will be having, is that which is equivalent to God. In which, in the beginning, we talked about how already God doesn't have free will, right? Because he is all powerful, all knowing, and everywhere. So there is no experience or no state of being, state of having, state of existence that he can or cannot choose, because he is all. And so, again, he has no free will, right? So I believe, like I said, the opposite of free will would be true love. And these beings, right, willingly sacrificing their free will allows for this much greater mind, okay, that is already under this sort of self-imposed restriction because they created life. So if God puts himself under oppression, he would be the devil. Already, they would naturally be the same exact creator, just the reflection, right? The above is what we would see. He is the manifester of free will, right? This image where all is free, and he appears to have this sort of angelic like essence where I guess one could perceive this to be the earthly realm, right? When it is personified as heaven, and man has freedom and he can do as he pleases. And the fact of the matter is that the only way man would be able to do as he pleases, right, to become whatever it is that he can imagine, is because of this self-imposed restriction that God oppresses himself so that he cannot choose what part of this infinite potential we call reality he can experience as real and what part he cannot. And in order for man to be able to have infinite potential and be able to conjure anything he can imagine, for him to be able to think and for it to exist, there would have to be a being that is constantly prevented from having the same opportunities, freedom, and benefits as others. Why? Because they would be experiencing all. Keep in subservience and hardship, right? So let's go back. Let's prolonged. I actually want to see if that word means continuing for a long time or longer than usual. How about an eternity, right? Prolonged cruel or unjust treatment or control. The exercise of authority or power in a burdensome, cruel, or unjust manner. An act or instance of oppressing or subjecting to cruel or unjust impositions or restraints. I believe the image of God in reality looks like a self-imposed restriction. It looks like self-imposed oppression. And when you think about that, he would become the devil because he would be oppressing himself, putting himself under prolonged, unjust treatment or control. He would be literally exercising his authority or power in a burdensome, cruel, or unjust manner from continuously preventing himself from being able to choose what part of creation he accepts as himself and what part he doesn't. This creates a split in the experience of God, because if it is sort of the nature of creation that the creator must oppress himself in order for free will to exist for that which he created, this naturally instills within all of creation the tendency, right, to be oppressive, because the nature of the relationship between God and himself is that he oppresses in order to produce this experience of limitless freedom for that which he creates. So it would be impossible for the Creator to separate from his creations his own nature and the process of which he used in order to create them. He cannot prevent them from being subject to that same process when they are creating themselves. And so I want to read this sort of Ernest Holmes because it's one of my favorite things that I've ever read, really. And so it says, there is an interesting myth in regard to the creating of man, which may serve to point out this fact. It is said that when the gods decided to make man and make him a divine being, they held a long discussion as to where would be the best place to hide his divinity. Some of the gods suggested that it be hidden in the earth, but others argued that someday man would penetrate the earth and so discover himself. It was then suggested that it be hidden in the depths of the sea, but this idea was rejected, for man would go under the sea and there discover his true nature. It was next suggested that his real nature should be deposited somewhere in the air, but this also was rejected, for he would surely fly through the air and find himself. After a long discussion, it was finally agreed that the best place to hide man's divinity would be in the innermost nature of man himself, this being the last place he would look to find it. This discovery would not be made until he had had all the experience necessary to complete a well-rounded life. You know, I really, really love this book. This is what it looks like. It's brainbetty.com, and maybe I'll link it in the description, but it looks like this. PDF. There you go, you can find it on Google. The Science of Mind, a complete course of lessons in the science of mind and spirit. These lessons are dedicated to that truth which frees man from himself and sets him on the pathway of a new experience, which enables him to see through the mist to the eternal and changeless reality, by Ernest S. Holmes. So, yes. All right. Okay. So, if the nature of God, right, is to be all, to think all, and to experience all, then in order for him to not be an oppressor to that all of which he is creating, he would have to be under a self-imposed restriction that would make him an oppressor to himself. And like I said, right, it would be impossible for him to prevent that which he created from being subject to having the same self-imposed restriction, right? And being the oppressor, period, right? The thing is, what makes him God and the devil is that he oppresses himself. And when he is the oppressor to himself, it creates, like I was saying sort of before, a split in his own reflection. Now, so that he doesn't contradict the limitless freedom that he has gifted to his creation so that he could be God, he has to contradict his own nature as God and experience a reflection of himself that will always create a version of him that is opposite in every way, because that same reflection will be present in man, where he has the ability, like I said, to oppress simply. But the thing is that God cannot enslave man, okay, or ordain him or force him to use that oppression on himself as his creator did, right? The fact of the matter is that when he became God and he split his power in two so that he could create an oppressive force, right, that would prevent him from having free will, man is also subject to this exact same split. And this force that would always prevent him from having free will, because God would also be the opposing force. He is intentionally being in order to prevent himself from having absolute freedom. As God, he cannot, once he has created this force, right, that is oppressive, and on top of that, within all of his creations, this force is also present, because again, he cannot separate or prevent his creations from being subject to all of his own qualities as their creator, and undergoing the same process he used to create them, right, in their own individual experience of being a creation. And so again, if God uses this opposing force, which would be known as the devil, right, this force that is oppressive in nature and enslaves in order to control, a force he created, right, to prevent himself as a creator from having the same opportunities, freedoms, and benefits as his creations, right, so that they could have every opportunity, limitless freedom, and the potential of experiencing every benefit that comes and exists with life, right? If God uses that force on himself, he cannot prevent man from using that force on each other. And that is how I believe oppression became a thing that enslaves society and mankind today, because they have free will and they also are born having a duality already present in their nature. And if man chooses, right, whether his nature is to be God or his nature is to be the opposing force God created, there is nothing that can stop him, because that was the risk God was willing to make when he decided to instill within all of his creations an oppressive nature, with the intention that it be used to serve good. Just because that was the intention does not mean that he can subject his creations to be in service to his will. That would defeat the entire purpose of him creating the force in the first place, to prevent himself from doing that. And that is why we go all the way back to the beginning, and I say I believe that the opposite of free will would be true love, right? And I think that the image of that would look just like this, where you have the ability to choose and the ability to act on your own accord and use your willpower as you wish. When you sacrifice that, you enter into the same state of being as God Himself. At that point, the relationship between the creation and the creator is now true to the original intention, which is that man would have unlimited power. He would have unlimited potential. He would have unlimited access to knowledge, but he would choose to do nothing with it at all. And this would align him with the spirit of God that serves and acts for the highest good of all. But what that looks like is self-imposed enslavement, and it also looks like being subject to the enslavement of the opposing force that God has created in order to keep creation pure. And so that is why I say I believe the imagery of true love looks just like this, because you see God not only for the creator He is, right? But you also see Him for the creator He is not. Because to only see one, right, is not truth. And it does not reveal the original act of love that was taken in order to keep all things one. So I think His truest lovers, right, also understand that He uses His force for good, and that He also uses His force for all, which is opposite in nature. And you know, it's interesting because there's this sort of pentagram here that's inverted. And let's see. A reverse pentagram with 2 points projecting upwards is a symbol of evil. It attracts sinister forces because it overturns the proper order of things and demonstrates the triumph of matter over spirit. So it is a symbol, right, that represents a force which is opposed to the nature of good. And I think that individuality has nothing to do with free will. Absolutely not. I think individuality will be thinking, acting, speaking as though you are the only one in all of existence. And this doesn't necessarily look like free will, but I think it looks like a self-imposed restriction that prevents you from experiencing any other state than being one with all, and there is no thing in the universe that you perceive as separate. Okay, I think this is the end of us going inside the simulation. And yeah, I'm laughing because I didn't think this is where I would end up, but that's a part of falling in love with the artist of oppression. Is that you view aligning with this force of life that knows all but cannot express through all. I view it as true love because I think it is true to the nature of the relationship between the creator and his creation, is that he allows himself to be an oppressor to himself so that all can be free. In that, the intention behind that is the creation imposes and allows that same oppression to be a part of their experience so that they may know what it's like to experience the love of God. That's the end. Toodles.